Good afternoon. Welcome to Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School, the December 2nd meeting of the Yakima School Board. We do offer Spanish interpretation services from Jorge with Language Connections. If you need translation assistance in person, please check with Jorge for a device. And Jorge, please translate that information.
Para aquellos que necesiten de la asistencia de un intérprete, tenemos los radios y estoy aquí disponible para hacerlo. Gracias.
Gracias. We provide live streaming for this meeting. The link can be found on our webpage under Board of Directors or by going directly to www.ysd7.org/board meetings. I hope you remember all that. If you wish to make a public comment, there are two options available for you. The first option is for commenting on agenda items only, and the second option, which comes toward the end of the meeting, is for all other topics. In order to speak tonight, you need to sign in with two forms, a sign-in form and the guidelines form. I believe they're on the table in the back. If you are interested in watching past meetings, you may find them on our webpage's YSD YouTube channel. Liz, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett.
Here.
Director Navarro Jr.
Here.
Director Rice.
Here.
Vice President Villanueva.
Here.
And President Walker.
Here. Next, we have a Pledge of Allegiance, and we have students to lead us today in the Pledge of Allegiance. I believe we have Lindell, Matthias, Christian, and Maya.
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
También tienen the word of the month, yes. La palabra del mes.
Hi, my name is Mia, and I'm from Mrs. Gottschalk's class. The word of the month is altruistic, demonstrating a selfless concern for the well-being of others.
Hola, mi nombre es Matías. Altruista. Sorry, I messed up. Hola, mi nombre es Matías. El nombre del mes es altruista, demostrando preocupación desinteresada por el bienestar de los demás.
Today, the schools of the Yakima School District rest on the ancestral lands of the 14 confederated tribes and bands of the Yakima Nation.
Hoy las escuelas del Distrito Escolar de Yakima descansan en las tierras ancestrales de las 14 tribus y bandas confederadas de la nación Yakima.
The people of the Yakima Nation inhabited more than 12 million acres.
La gente de la nación Yakima habitó más de 10 billones de acres.
Across Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Franklin, Grant, Kittitas, Klickitat, and Yakima counties.
En los condados de Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Grant, Franklin, Kittitas, Klickitat, y Yakima.
Today we honor those native peoples who are tied to the land through history, legends, and culture.
Hoy honramos a estos pueblos originales que están vinculados en la tierra a través de historias, leyendas y culturas.
We acknowledge the descendants who live in the world today.
Reconocemos a sus descendientes que viven en el mundo de hoy.
We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Agradezcamos a los guardianes de la tierra, quienes han vivido aquí y continúan viviendo aquí desde tiempos inmemoriales.
An acknowledgement is a simple, powerful way to show respect. Un reconocimiento es una manera simple y poderosa de mostrar respeto.
And a step toward correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous peoples' history and culture.
Y un paso hacia la corrección de las historias y prácticas que borran la historia y la cultura de los pueblos indígenas.
It also honors the truth.
También honra la verdad.
As a school district, we will continue to build upon our relations with the Yakima Nation.
Como distrito escolar, continuaremos fortaleciendo nuestras relaciones con la nación Yakima.
Thank you to all of our students that participated today, either live or by tape. At this time, we have several reports to the board. We will begin with Francis Guerrero, YEA President.
Thanks. Good afternoon. My apologies for having been absent. I promise you that it wasn't because the root canal was more favorable. So I am reporting on two issues that I have already reported before, the last time we were in an elementary. So again, the lack of parent resources is causing huge problems in our schools. And I want to read you this email that applies to multiple schools, but this particular school especially. Our paraeducator staff is stretched so thin that for 15 minutes in the morning, we have 2 staff members watching all the kids who have arrived. And then at 8:30, we get another 2 staff members to watch kids. This ends up in an absolute mess of chaos every day. We have too many kids, especially behavior kids, who arrive early. This is a problem all day long, but especially in the morning. We have constant arguments, fights on the field, and plans for kids to stay apart during recess. We have a big kid side and little kid side, which means that 1 to 2 adults are watching all of the K2 kids and 1 to 2 adults are watching the 3-5 kids. It ends up in chaos every day, being so short-staffed. I, teacher, have been going out in the mornings to help because when admin is called to break up a fight, no one responds. Because when our admin are in meetings before school and our behavior specialist is running PBIS and BSET teams, they aren't available. I have been going out to help my tier 3 behavior kid be successful and not get into fights. Overall, I understand that it is not in my contract to supervise recess, but I am currently doing so because we are so spread thin with resources that I am between using my contract time to watch kids to keep them safe or have my prep time before school. I also feel that if I'm not out there, it is setting up many of the kids for failure because they need an adult to respond to arguments and the paraeducator staff are being spread too thin for it to be safe outside. I don't know the solution to this, and I do realize that I am the one choosing to go out there, but our school is so understaffed right now that I feel that I have to choose between setting my kids up for success in the mornings, and honestly all day, or having kids in fistfights and getting suspended. The lack of para support is causing huge problems, not just with the specialists that I outlined last time, but with recess supervision and lunch supervision. I'm going to tell you right now that you are straining paras and you are straining teachers to breaking points. I have heard since the beginning of November, teachers telling me that they feel June tired. June tired. You don't usually hear that until March, and they're feeling it already. It causes problems with administrators. This lack of resource is actually causing adversarial relationships with administrators that shouldn't be adversarial. When the admin is caught between a rock and a hard place because they have to have supervisors out there for the children, but they're taking from SPED resources. So if I'm a SPED teacher, I believe that resource should be with me all day, not supervising lunch, not supervising recess, not supervising school parking lots before and after school. But for the admin, safety is paramount. Never mind if I'm breaking the law in using that special education para to do so. You're pulling from the highest need kids to do other supervisory duties that shouldn't be happening. There should be adequate regular classroom paras to provide all of that supervision. My teachers shouldn't be doing that. It's literally a contract violation for them to have to supervise bus duty before and after school. But especially with the SPED teachers, If they want their students to be successful, they're sacrificing their time to be out there and help monitor them. When all of these kids are coming early, you can't just depend on one or two people. Our elementaries, right? They've got hundreds of kids. 2 paras are not enough to supervise those hundreds of kids. In the cafeteria, maybe. Out at recess, definitely no. There has to be more adult supervision out there. And you're burning those paras out even more, not just because you're spreading them so thin, but because you have forced them to change positions. People that used to be library paras or resource room paras, just regular classroom paras, you cut those and then you put them into one-on-one positions without training, I might add. And so they're completely unprepared. And they don't know what to do. Even if you had really good trained paras, that would be a difficult job. So you're totally burning out the para staff that we do have and the teacher staff that we have. I remind you how many people resigned last year in addition to the retirements. We lost over 100 CERT staff. I'm sure in your head you're thinking, great, then I don't have to riff as much. But it's not great to be burning our staff out that way. The other thing that's burning out our staff is a lack of custodial coverage. It's a huge issue. Breakfast after the bell exacerbates it exponentially. And so, of course, our elementary teachers are feeling really frustrated because they have to do so much cleaning themselves. But at the high school level, it's equally frustrating because our custodians don't just sweep and mop and toss out garbage cans. They're in charge of event setup, inside and outside, setup and takedown. They're in charge of answering any alarms, answering deliveries, taking care of spills, taking care of broken glass, broken furniture, an alarm trip breaks, the breaker trips. A new student just came in and now I need a new desk, I need a new chair. They have a dozen things every day that they're taking care of. And you pull from night staff to take care of day staff when somebody in the day is gone. But night is when most of the cleaning gets done. So since you pulled from them, stuff doesn't get cleaned. Davis High School teachers are especially frustrated. Their rooms are going a whole week without being swept. And it shows. I'm sure we had critter problems pre-COVID, just normal critter problems. They are so much more now. I had a music teacher send me a video of ants in their room at the middle school level. Can you imagine if those ants got into the instruments? Disgusting. And mice. Like, I'm talking to the custodians and I'm like, how do you know there's mice? Like, do you see them? No, we see the droppings. But in one instance, yes, I did see the mouse because it's learned to circumvent the traps. So he had to take care of it himself. And it's funny, but it's not, right? Our students shouldn't be living in these conditions, especially when word on the street is one of the buildings that we're renting gets better custodial cleaning than our own classrooms do. Imagine how that makes our staff feel. It is untenable to be running as lean as we have been. We need that extra support. We need that extra staffing, not just for supervision, but to take care of all of the things that they took care of that have now been forced upon teachers. That's part of the burnout, is having to take care of all these extra things that they didn't before. And at the elementary level, when I'm volunteering to supervise, that cuts into my prep time, that cuts into my parent contact time. And then either A, it doesn't happen, or B, it happens on my own time at home. It is asking too much of us. Too much. That burnout is not something that should be happening already. And students are the ones who suffer the consequences of that. Consider this. Relationships are important. Those students, especially the tiny ones, they depend on all adults. The cook, the custodian, the para, the protect, the teacher, the librarian, the counselor, they're all important. And every time you take one of them away, that's one less person that a student has a chance to build a relationship with. And I think we have seen in the past 2 weeks how important it is for students to have someone that they can reach out to. And staffing cuts have reduced the number of people that they have to reach out to. I've brought both of these issues to you before. I beg you to listen and to hear, because my teachers are really, really frustrated. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. At this time, we would like to welcome Samantha Howell, principal of Martin Luther King, for her school presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Superintendent Green, President Walker, members of the board for being here this evening. I'm very excited to share with you just a little bit about what's happening at MLK recently, and then what we're looking forward to throughout the year. I have had the absolute honor of getting to be the first year principal here. This is my first year as principal at Martin Luther King, and I love it. So it's the best place in Yakima School District. Come check us out. We're pretty cool during the day too. Those kiddos that you saw are amazing, and they were so excited to be here tonight. They said, "Do we do this once a month?" I'm like, "Oh no, we're gonna do this just now." So they were ready. But I'm gonna just share. You have the whole slide deck sent to you, but I'm just gonna highlight 5 slides, 5 initiatives that we're working on here. Oh. So the first thing I want to share, maybe not. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I want to share that's super exciting about Martin Luther King is that we had the opportunity to be in the first cohort for dual language. So we are currently serving kids kindergarten through 3rd grade. And we have 198 students who are currently on track to be bilingual and biliterate by graduation, which is almost half. And we're only to 3rd grade, so that's awesome. You'll see in the pictures up here is a kindergarten dual language classroom. They are learning Spanish 80% of their day, and it's amazing to see the language that's already happened in 3 months. So I welcome you to come see them during the day anytime you want. It's really fun to see their language develop. In the middle is the being bilingual is my superpower. We do believe that being bilingual is a superpower. As you will see when we take our tour, everything is in Spanish and English around the school because we really want students to know that that is a huge part of their education, being able to speak in both English and Spanish and read and write, and they're doing a great job getting there. So the next slide is our Martin Luther King is in school improvement. So I just wanted to share with you our 3 goals that we have in school improvement. We are in school improvement for our English language learners and students with disabilities. And so there is a focus on both of those groups throughout the year. And so every time we look at data, we disaggregate out those data points so we make sure that those students are also growing more than their peers because we need that gap to close. So the first goal we have is to get our attendance rate to stay at 92% or above. Last year we ended at 89%, but we are currently sitting at 92%, so we're happy with that, but it's not enough, right? I need students here if they're going to learn. So we are really pushing our students to be here and to feel like they belong. So we're working through our positive behavior intervention program. All students are all-stars at Martin Luther King, and so we really follow our STAR rules, which are S, to solve problems, T, to take responsibility, A, to make good decisions, and R, to respect self, others, and property. So we're really about getting the students to feel that when they're here, but also to make them successful as they move on to middle school and high school. So we are focusing on attendance, but also working on our office discipline referrals. So the data for office discipline referrals is not in your slide deck, and I will get that sent to you. So that was not added before it got sent. So I'll make sure that I follow up with the discipline referrals as well. Through this, though, we really want school to be a place where students want to come, right? Like we want students here and ready to learn. It should be joyful to come to elementary school. It should be a place where you feel connected. So we have started family engagement nights. We do one event a month, which has been super fun, and we will do one event for the rest of the festival. In October, I was told, you can expect like 200 people. It's fine. They're not, it's just like our first big one. And over 600 people showed up that night. So it was super fun to get to know families on that level and really just connect with families. So my hope is that we will just keep doing those and more families will attend and they'll feel like school can be the place where they can connect and be in community with us. Our goal 2 and goal 3 are around our math and ELA proficiency. So goal 2 is that we will go from 20%, which we know is really low, to 30% or above. Like that's not the cap. We're hoping that we get a lot more students to pass the SBA this year. Especially in math. And so we're focusing on our practice SBAs, which are the focus interim assessment blocks. And the staff has been trained on how to give those and then how to look at the data so that we know where our students are in real time and we're not just waiting till the very last test at the end of the year. We're also focusing on the optimal math block when we're teaching, as well as a focus on student reflection. So we really want students to know where they're at in their learning, right? Like where are you and where do you want to go, and then helping them get there. So a lot of student reflection. We are also using the math SBA for grades 3, 4, 5, but we know they're not K1, 2. So we want to make sure that those students are included as well. So we use the FastBridge Math Screener for math. And then for ELA, we are going to go from 24% to at least 34% this year by really focusing on those target main ideas, the target of main idea and listening and inferencing. We know if students can get those, that they have a really good foundation to pass the SBA. So we've really dug into those. And then we are also doing focus SBAs or focus interim assessments for the SBA so that we know where students are at in real time. With that, again, new to MLK, so I'm learning a lot about the staff and the students and where they've been and where they're going. And because of that, I thought it was very important that they meet with me once a week. So I get to meet with each individual grade level team once a week, and they bring data to me and they tell me where they've been that week, where they're headed. We make action plans and I can partner with them. And it includes my IF and occasionally also the ELD teacher so that we have a team that can partner with teachers to say, where are you at? Where are you going? And how can we get there? And so those have been really great meetings. I would highly recommend them. They've just helped me know where our students are so we have a snapshot. So I'll share with you a little bit of data because that's important. So we did take a interim assessment block, which is a focus. It takes one standard. It's just one standard in math. And we had 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade gave it. These are super important because they help the students know what the platform looks like. So if you're in 3rd grade, you've never taken the SBA before, this gives you an idea of what the platform looks like. So they can go on and it's the right vocab, the way the questions are laid out are the same, and it gives teachers a really good idea of where their students are in that moment. So as you can see here, in red is % below, which would mean those are the students who are not yet there. Like they're gonna need some intervention. They're gonna need some help to get to that standard. % at or near means that they are either a really high 2, meaning they're gonna pass, or a level 3, and then the % above is that level 4. So they take these at least 3 times a year. They just did their first one. They'll do another one in January, and we'll do one more before the SBA so that we know where our students are. So that come SBA time, it's not a huge surprise where our students are at. And I also want to share some literacy data. So we, like I said, are focusing on main idea and key details. And so our common formative assessments are given by grade level at least once a month, and they share this data with me as well so that I know where their students are at, make an action plan for if they're not there. And so K through 5 does this. And you can see where they're at. Red again is the not yet. We're getting there. They might need some intervention. We need to figure out what happened. Yellow is almost, and then that green is they are good to go. And then I also gave you the October DIBELS and Lectura progress monitoring data. And so this just, again, the red is not yet. Green is they've made it and they're on track. And that's that. So yeah, so we're getting there. We're definitely we're reflecting a lot. We're moving forward, but as a new principal, I think it's important that I get to meet with each team, and I'm intentional. And so we're doing the things to get our scores where they need to be. So that's it. Any questions for me?
Are there any questions from the board or comments?
I just have a comment. Thank you for hosting us
Yeah, thanks
today.
for being here.
It's been a while since we were here, and so it'll be nice to get another tour of the school.
Awesome.
In looking at your DIBELS and Lectura composite, I think it's the slide before that, maybe. No?
After.
Is it after that? Anyway, there's a slide that shows a comparison for scoring of the DIBELS and Lectura, both non-dual language and dual language.
Yes. I know what
And-
you're talking about, even though it's not up there. I
Yeah.
do know what you're talking about.
And I don't know, I guess in the slide deck, it's slide 19,
There it is.
the one that we have. I can't help but notice the difference in the scoring between the non-dual language and the dual language students. We knew that that would happen
Mhm.
because of the research that we've done with it. And it's good to see, even in this small little slice, that is proving out the research, that dual language students do perform better. And that as they continue through the system, they will in likelihood have more graduates in that group than the non-dual language students do. But it's good to see this comparison. So thank you for providing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Data tells a story, right? And it's a good story. We will see, I'm excited this year because we're in third grade dual to see how their SBA, how that translates to
Mhm.
SBA.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
No questions, but just want to thank you as well for hosting us and for your presentation today, and I appreciate the positivity you're bringing to the group this year.
Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to be here. We have a great staff.
Okay, hearing no more. Again, thank you. And I believe we'll take a short tour now.
I
Is that
believe
the time
so.
now? Okay,
Yes.
so 10 minutes?
That's my hope.
Okay.
You're gonna keep us on.
So we will briefly, we'll
Hope is not a
briefly
strategy.
briefly
but we're getting
adjourn for 10 minutes and keep questions to a minimum.
I just want to point this out really quick. We
Oh
did
my
a
gosh.
little illustration.
Our ELD
Our
teacher
ELD
did it.
teachers were pretty amazing, and found out where they all
Panama,
Yeah.
super cool.
These are our
So-
students?
These are our students, our newcomers.
Wow, really?
Where they're
That-
from, and
we had
so
like a giant group of newcomers last year and then already this year.
Wow,
So it's cool to
this
see.
is amazing.
It's a good visual of our collective.
Yeah.
And they all have we were talking about their stories today and like how Erica Rodriguez is one of our ELD teachers, and she gets to hear all the great stories about how they ended up here. You know, like they all have their own story and their own, this is what happened and this is why we're here, which is pretty awesome.
And every weekend you get a little tale, right?
Every weekend. Yeah.
After every weekend.
A new tale. So it's really cool, but we just had to point it out because I think it's really powerful of what makes up our school. So there it is. Yeah. Romero's class. She's been here a few years, but this is her second year teaching dual language. So second graders, they have language all over the place, which is amazing. They did some writing for you out on the wall too, if you want to pass by, and they illustrated. So this is.
Is she supportive of dual language?
She loves it. She loves dual language. Yes, she does. She's very supportive of dual language.
She's taught dual language a few different times throughout her career. At a previous district and at our district.
Yeah, and at our district. We've done that a couple of times.
So yeah, so she does a great job of incorporating it into everything. And they are 60% Spanish, 40% English in second grade. Our kindergarten dual. One thing I love about this class is that it's very clear like where her students are at. So they're always working towards their next goal no matter where they're at. And so it's a good way for students to see. They get very excited about it. So, and we have a mix of, there's 24 total in here, and probably 7 that came from an English background, and the rest are Spanish speakers, but they're flourishing. So Lindley is also in this class, right? Sister classroom? Yeah.
Where's your chair?
Right here. Right here. Yeah. So, yeah, our kinder, it's really fun to watch the kinder language change so fast in just 3 months. They get it.
¿Habla español? ¿Sí? ¿Puedes contar? 1, 2, 3.
¿Sí? ¿Ahí? Yeah, there's you.
Oh, and you're counting? Okay.
Yeah,
You
so
gotta
they
count
know
yourself.
where they're and 10 by 10 and 10 by 10s.
Again, we're working on student self-reflection. So students know where they're at and where they're supposed to be headed. And so visually, it's nice for students to know where they're at. And these are all, this is pretty cool. These are 16 days of kindness. So every day in December has a kindness, and on the other side, it tells them what they're working on. So our kinders they're working on kindness. We're just working on being with other people at the moment, but they're very fun.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you again, Principal Howell, for an informative tour. Next up, we have Dr. Maria Lucero, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, is going to give our Global Ends report on goal number 3.
Good evening, President Walker, members of the board, Superintendent Green. Thank you for the opportunity to present on Ends report goal number 3. Goal number 3, equitable opportunity to achieve core mastery and critical thinking, which states that all students will be empowered to own their education, meet or exceed standards, be critical and creative thinkers, seek solutions, be advocates for racial and social justice. And this is interpreted as all students means all students, no exceptions. Meet or exceed standards is defined as achieving a proficient level as set by OSPI on the annual Smarter Balanced Assessment in the areas of English language arts and mathematics, specifically in grades 3 through 8 and 10. A proficient level as set by OSPI on the annual Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science in the area of science in grades 5, 8, and 11. And this goal is assessed using OSPI state report card data, and it is determined that we are making progress as outlined in slides 8 through 20. So here we see our English language arts data. If you recall, prior to 21-22, we had our COVID situation, which is why we chose to start our data here with 21-22 for grades 3 through 10, showing the past 3 years. You'll see an asterisk by grades 4, 7, and 10, which are called out in the goal specifically that I read earlier. And you have access to more detailed data that you've had the opportunity to preview prior to today. In mathematics, again, you'll see the asterisks by grades 4, 7, and 10. starting back in the 21-22 school year, 22-23, and this past school year. And our science data for the same years, and I will highlight some specific information here. So for English language arts, we're inching along with an increased percent meeting exceeding proficiency for our EL students and ELA SBA of 10.2 to 12.2. An increased percent meeting or exceeding for students in ELA WA-AIM, 51.5% to 52.2. Increased percent meeting exceeding for students with a Section 504 plan and ELA, 29.5% to 32.1. In mathematics, an increased percent meeting exceeding for ELL students in math, SBA, 7.9% to 10%. An increased percent meeting exceeding in math WA-AIM, 52.6% to 60.3%. And in science, an increased percent meeting exceeding for all students in WACAS, the science assessment, of 27.7% to 30%. Areas of opportunity with English language arts based on the Smarter Balanced Assessment. Migrant students passed at a lower rate than non-migrant students, 22.9% versus 33.8%. English language learners passed at a lower rate than non-English language learners at 12.2% versus 43.1%. And students with disabilities passed at a lower rate than students without disabilities, 7.7% versus 36.5%. In the area of mathematics, migrant students passed at a lower rate than non-migrant students, 15.2% versus 20.7%. ELL students pass at a lower rate than non-ELL students, 10% versus 25.3%. Students with disabilities pass at a lower rate than students without disabilities, 6.5% versus 22.2%. Low-income students passed at a lower rate than non-low-income students, 17.8% versus 38.6%. And on the science assessment, English language learners pass at a lower rate than non-English language learners, 17.8% versus 38.6%. And migrant students pass at a lower rate than non-migrant students, 17.5% versus 31.5%. We are continuing on our YSD PLC journey, which is our big teaching and learning rock. As a matter of fact, this Wednesday, during our half-day professional development for staff, district-wide, we'll continue on the assessment piece. So really bringing our teams together and walking them through how to analyze data by target for our essential standards, our guaranteed standards, and how to analyze that as PLTs, and for more importantly, to plan action steps. So what will we do when students aren't learning it, and what will we do when students are learning the essential standards? Questions?
Any questions or comments?
Can you remind me the difference between the general SBA versus the WA-AIM?
Yes, so the WA-AIM is for our students in our self-contained classrooms. And so it's a modified version of the state assessment.
And so the scores there, I think you pointed out, were significantly higher. Is that because it's kind of smaller group instructions? I guess I'm thinking about the all students, general SBA and WSAC math was at 20.2% grade level, but under the WA-AIM it's 60.2%. So are the standards different? Is WA-AIM easier? Or I'm just curious why there's such a significant difference there.
Yeah, so the items are different. And I think we've just gotten better versed at tailoring instruction so that students are better prepared for the items that are crafted specifically for the WA-AIM.
Does that mean we're teaching to the test?
Well, when we are teaching to our guaranteed standards, those are reflected in our state assessments. So I would say that we are preparing them for the unique items, as Principal Howell mentioned earlier, with the focused IABs. we shouldn't wait until SBA day for them to be exposed to the specific rigorousness of what they'll see. But then I think what's more important, especially with this Wednesday, is ensuring that our instruction on a daily basis is aligned with the rigorousness of what they'll see on the state assessment.
Do the kids who take WAAIM, do they also take the general SBA?
They do not.
Okay, it's one or the other.
Yes.
How much, and it's, I don't know if you have data to show this, but in recent years, I haven't actually seen the makeup of some of the tests that are given. But in past years, when I was working in elementary schools, I was working pretty closely with the testing. It seemed to me that in math and science especially, we're still not just testing math and science, we're testing English vocabulary. And I'm wondering how much of the testing is really a reflection of mastery of English rather than mastery of the content, where students, if they were testing in a lab setting or a more practical way, might be performing higher. I mean, I still have some questions about the validity of the testing that we're using in our state. But we can't change that. It's what we have. But it seems to me we're not really testing math skills sometimes or science knowledge. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree. Certainly if they're taking a math assessment, for example, and our students are struggling with decoding, right, then it really does become a reading assessment in addition to a math assessment. The types of items that they're exposed to and background knowledge and context matters. Those are just a few factors that would play into their ability to access the types of items that they're exposed to. And truthfully, there are different ways to demonstrate proficiency. But right now, we are required to administer those assessments.
I'm still concerned with how we seem to have flatlined. I'm hopeful that our PLCs, I'm really encouraged by what I observe when I go in and see the process that we're being more systematic in our teaching. I
Yes.
still am going to get on my soapbox a little bit and say, I really think that every teacher system-wide needs to view themselves as a vocabulary teacher, and that we need to be pre-teaching vocabulary at every level and pre-teaching it before we expose kids to content, because frankly, it's when you're learning a second language, kids just don't have the vocabulary. They don't know what the teacher's saying. They don't know what the words mean that come out of the teacher's mouth unless that teacher is systematically checking for understanding. And I really think we need to do more of that and see improvement. But I'll get off my soapbox now.
And that
Go
is a
ahead,
part of the
Melissa.
PLC process. When our teachers unpack the guaranteed standards, part of it is identifying that vocabulary that students really need to understand. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? I don't want to take up.
I have a question, I guess, more of a perception question, I guess, than anything. At our last meeting, we discussed how our graduation rates compare statewide. Thank you, Stacy, for those statistics. And we're awfully close to state average, pretty across the board with our graduation rates. And I guess the perception is if our proficiency or mastery in these areas is so low, and yet we're still seeing very respectably high graduation rates, is the perception, that we're simply passing kids to pass kids to give them diplomas. And how do we combat that perception in the community when we're discussing academic success with parents and taxpayers?
That is a really good question. Well, there are different pathways to graduation. And so I think giving students different opportunities, but also informing our community of those different pathways. I think that I know that the state assessment is one thing, but I think when they're demonstrating proficiency in their courses through the PLC, work is ensuring the rigorous level of what they're expected to be able to do beyond high school. And so I think informing our community of what that looks like.
I really appreciate how you talked about multiple pathways to graduation, because I think that the answer is a little bit in that phrase right there, because if you had a system that worked, that was universal, then there wouldn't be a need for all of the multiple pathways to graduation that we now see. So if I were explaining this to somebody from the outside, it's like, yes, that's one measurement that is used universally, but what you don't see are all the other ways that we recognize that students are different and can have a different method of achieving success. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Maria.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Follow-up question, yeah. Oh, there's some feedback. I don't know why that's happening. On some of the earlier slides, you went back 3 years in sharing data. Have we, and I guess my question is going back 2 more years, have we reached or surpassed the pre-COVID assessment levels that we had seen before COVID?
I would say in general, not yet. If you look at individual schools and even within some subgroups, yes, but we're starting to. We're starting to get back into that direction. And part of it is really a lot of what we were strong in our Tier 1 instruction is providing refreshers on some of those really strong practices that we had in place before. And so when you think about it, you know what, I know it seems like a long time ago, but it hasn't been. This is our 3rd year with PLCs. And I think as a system, we are strengthening our Tier 1, and I have no doubt that we'll continue to show that growth and proficiency that we saw pre-COVID.
Is there, I guess this is a bigger question and not necessarily maybe for you, maybe that's something that we discuss maybe at our next retreat, but I'm curious if we really haven't seen a whole lot of growth, right? We continue to see kind of the heart rate effect where it might go up and might go down, but generally, and you said this, Norm, has kind of flatlined. Is it time to rethink the PLCs if we've used that system for 3 years and haven't really seen progress, and if we're still not at pre-COVID levels, which was low to begin with? Do we need to rethink something and maybe shift and do something that might result in better outcomes? And certainly recognize there's a lot of layers to, student achievement and, what goes on at home and, teacher effectiveness and, stability of the workforce, things like that. But, we're just not seeing a whole lot of progress.
I think a retreat would be great for that. I could talk for an hour on that right now, and we could certainly solicit the input of, I think, everybody over there shaking their head saying, no, don't get rid of PLCs. I mean, that's the fundamental work of what we do, but I think it merits having a more in-depth conversation, because if that's something that's going through your head, which obviously it's important to address that and to talk about what actually has happened during that and what during those times and how long it actually takes to implement. So I think you bring up a good point, and we can add that certainly to the agenda.
So as you know, I've been on the board for 17, 18 years. So this is coming from that, my experience. And there are 2 words that came out already from President Walker and Vice President Villanueva, is that flatlining and the heart rate, which is something I've seen in the last, I don't know. I mean, we went through a period where we did have significant increases in the test scores. But it's been the heart rate, and for some reason we just can't. And I'm trying to think what's going on. What can we do as a district, as a board? We've come up with a equity policy. Is it helping? Doesn't appear to be pushing scores up. We've changed our calendar. Is that helping? PLCs. So it's as Vice President Villanueva was saying, maybe it's time to re-examine as a board. As a board, I think I'm talking to the board, is maybe it's time to re-examine what we're doing as a board and you're just looking at the results. So, I mean, they're just COVID and change. I mean, we've been through it all, right? Change of tests, assessments, money, COVID hit, and we just can't get out of any of that, right? And so that's I'm just wondering. And sometimes I get a little discouraged because, here we have another group of students who are not performing to to level, and we have all these things in place, and what comes to mind is we talk about equity and of opportunity and equity of results, and we're not seeing that. And it concerns me as a board member. And again, seeing increases of 1% or less than percent or even 2%, I would even say 5% would be making progress, would be questionable to me now after 17, 18 years, I have to say. So, and I've always asked that, what is a significance, what increase would be significant, right? Is it 1%, 2%? Is it 10? What is that? How can we really assess that everything that we put in place is having a direct impact on student achievement? And so right now, I'm not seeing that. If it's a 1% to 2% increase, I'm not seeing a direct correlation or a causal, whatever you want to call it, with everything that we're doing and the results that we've seen so far. So that's just kind of what's on top of my head. I can go into a little bit more detail, but I think a retreat would be a good idea to process further.
And just to add my 2 cents before I walk away, since PLCs came up, it's been 2 years and 3 months of implementation, and change does take time. This is my 15th year in the district. This is the first big initiative that we have moved forward as an entire system in my 15 years. So I do think it's worth something continuing to really.
Can you say that again?
I think it's something that we continue to put forth our efforts in. As a principal supervisor, I've had the opportunity to sit down with principals one-on-one and see the growth. Now, we might not be seeing it as a system quite yet, because we do know change takes multiple years, but I am being a part of the PLC work is really important, because it is something that we're all in together. I can go of the 6 principals I supervise, we're speaking the same language. And we're not done. I mean, we still have this full year to get through that full cycle that I shared on that final slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board?
I guess in response to Raymond's concern, until we get to a point where, this is my opinion, until we get to a point where we are comparing and addressing the same students' growth. So right now, we're comparing apples and oranges. We have 3rd grade students this year who will be 4th grade students next year, but we're comparing this year's 3rd grade to next year's 3rd grade. They're different kids. And on top of that, we're assessing their English language acquisition. And we know that the majority of our district is not necessarily fluent in English. Mm-hmm. They have some, maybe street English, mm-hmm. but not necessarily classroom English. So there are a lot of factors in this puzzle that we have to address. And to my way of thinking, we can't say legitimately that we can't say that we're tracking kids and because we're comparing child A to child B and how their progression is going. And it's my soapbox, and I think I'm going to jump on Norm's soapbox too. Until we get to a point where we provide all the supports for all the kids and assess each one individually with their individual growth over the course of their educational experience. It's not fair to say that our district is failing students. And it's not fair to say that we're not making progress, because we don't know, quite honestly, if we're making progress or not, because we're doing all we're not doing all these other things. So, you know, I don't think we can say that we're not making progress, because I think in my gut's telling me that we are, because we have the end result of students who are graduating. And a high percentage of them are graduating. And over the course of their 5th year or 6th year, even more of them are graduating. So we get very close to 100% by the end of the 6th year. If you look at that data. So does the end result, is that the most important thing? Or is the most important thing that we are bound by some system that is inequitable, that evaluates students in an inequitable fashion?
I like to say, and this, we're not debating anything, we're just discussing. So, and my other, that part of what, you know, my view, my opinion is, I see students when they graduate at YVC. I've seen them at Central, I've seen them at Heritage University, right? And so when after they graduate with high school diploma and they're tested for placement for math and English, well, they're very low. And so they're having to spend a quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters to get to college level. And so, you know, for 10th graders, I don't know if I would call that making progress, going for 13.6, regardless if it's cohort versus non-cohort or whatever statistical analysis you want to use. Going from 13.6 to 13.2, it shows, I mean, well, that's actually a decrease there. But I mean, if you're looking at just less than a percentage point, all I'm saying is that really progress. It is if you just look at the numbers, but I'm looking at it from the perspective of our students prepared for college. And I'm finding, and I could get data from YVC or from whatever, and I can tell you that most of the kids that I've dealt with from Yakima School District are below college level for reading and writing and for math. And so they're having to spend a lot of time making up, getting refresher courses to get to that level. And that's not the only impact. So this also keeps them from going into the STEM related, to the more like STEM related fields like architects and architecture and engineering, computer science, because they're so behind in math that they just can't. We talk about equity and opportunity and results. It's not happening when they graduate. I'm sure it is happening. I'm sorry, I rephrase that. It is happening, but I see a lot of cases, and this is all anecdotal information that I'm giving you, personal experience. And part of my frustration is that they're coming in low test scores, low English and math scores and abilities or skills, and they're missing out on a lot of opportunities in higher education, which impacts their opportunity for careers, for professions, and ultimately impacts their quality of life. If they're not able to go into these higher paying jobs, more technical engineering, STEM related fields, and they're settling for 2-year degrees, or a lot of them are not even graduating from college, from YVC, from Central and Heritage, because they just don't have the skills to accomplish or complete those goals. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as well. The frustration you're hearing from me, and that's just my experience. I wanted to just let the board know about.
Thank you. I think we've certainly opened up some things we want to address maybe more thoroughly when we do have our bi-year annual retreats and talk about what things are, maybe dig a little deeper into what we think is going well, and then also reminding ourselves that test scores alone don't measure what students are doing, but they often lack some entry skills into other options. That's a concern.
Norm, I think the only thing that I'd like to make sure gets voiced here today is that a number of years ago, the strategic plan that was participated in by hundreds of people in our community and prescribed our compass for the district, the community expects both. They want mastery and they want high graduation rates. And so it's, I hear you, Martha, as far as measuring that, but our community expects both. And I think that, I think that's a reasonable expectation as a parent and as a taxpayer myself. So I'd love to show up to that retreat. Our last retreat was fun. This would be a good one. This would be a good one.
And I just want to clarify something as well. I'm not saying anything about the quality, I guess, our teachers, the education, instruction, what's going on, PLCs and our superintendent team. I'm just trying to figure out why we can't do this, or why we can't get the scores to do that and keep going up and to level off somewhere about 80-90%. So please know that I do appreciate all the work that our teachers do, our parents, everybody, cooks, everybody, transportation, superintendents, assistant superintendents, everybody, the board. It's just, what can we do to turn this, to get those scores up? So thank you.
Thank you. I think, Trevor, did you want to add one more comment? I think we're good.
I'm not good at double dutch. I couldn't get in there. I was trying to comment after Martha because and Ryan picked this up. Director Beckett picked it up really well, talking about the strategic plan and that expectation. So the community really does expect both. And I think recognizing the difference between our district and other districts is important. We have to know context. And it's important also then to have an agreement between, I think, everyone that we're talking about context and not excuses, because it can get kind of confusing when you're talking about our context and it can come out feeling like somebody's making an excuse. We don't want to make an excuse for our students, but I think that context is important. And one of the things that we learned in the financial summit that we had a couple of weeks ago at the Davis Auditorium when David Knight spoke was the importance of how money does affect things. And I'm not saying that's the be all end all, but it certainly is just one factor. And one of the slides that he shared was showing the actual amount of funding that comes per student in our area. And so I'm looking at it right now, and you have like Ellensburg, according to what he shared in his research out of the University of Washington, you're talking federal, state, and local dollars. You're looking at Ellensburg with $20,476 per student. You're looking at SELA with $17,204, and you're looking at Yakima with $14,048 per student. So when you're talking about that difference and then the outcome, the measured outcomes of per thousand, what that dictates on the other end, that's certainly a factor. Another thing that I believe is a factor would be our high school schedule. When we have 24 credits that are available and you have surrounding districts that have 32 or 28 credits, you have students that are taking classes that they want to take aside from the ones that they're required to take. School becomes much more entertaining and involved, and I'm there doing what I want to do, versus if I fail that one class, now I'm trying to make that up off, in hours afterwards. And that's something that has plagued the Yakima School District since Core 24 was adopted. And we haven't been able to get past the adult issues that would make that become a different model. And I think, once we start peeling back a lot of the layers, we'll find out that, there are things that we can control, and there are barriers that are in place that we have to recognize and have that frank, open conversation to recognize that, there are things, there are posts that are in place that we either have to, come to terms with and or be dedicated to removing. And I think that, every time you come here, we open the meeting hearing about negative things when we know that there are so many positive things, but they're always adult issues and not kid issues. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be that way, but there needs to be a conversation across all dynamics to recognize that there are things that we can do collectively. And that's why that we have all those sayings like together, everyone achieves more, we're stronger together. And I think we're on that pathway. And a big part of that has been really, I think in the last year plus, 3 months, has been bringing our staff together to really recognize that the expertise is within and not trying to go outside, but bringing those teams together, because honestly, everyone needs a coach. And if you can bring that team together and have them coach one another and work together unified, then I'm not behind that. And I'll tell you that as a Spanish teacher in my time in the district, I was completely isolated, that we had the isolation from teacher to teacher to teacher where we were not sharing And I would have been a much better teacher and had better outcomes had we had in place what we have now. So again, just for context, there's a lot of other things that we can talk about, and I certainly hope that we do that. And I want to commend the board right now because we had one of our last, I think, survey monkeys was about how we need to engage more in these type of conversations. So there is nothing that is hidden from the public, because we're not having these conversations in the shadows, but we need to have more of them in the open like this. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the board engaging in this conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to move on at this time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for sparking some lively conversation and for a thorough report. Okay, next up, and this maybe segues right into the next presentation, which is our leadership and accountability report. Mr. Mendez.
Thank you, President Walker, Superintendent Green, members of the board. I am here to share. It's hard to follow that, but principal leadership. And I am going to discuss just the 5 slides that I'll be showing you. You have the entire deck, slide deck. My name is Hector Mendez, for those who are watching online. Hector Mendez is one of the executive directors in teaching and learning and leadership. And so I'm here to present these slides regarding principal leadership. And one thing I'm going to start off with is something that strategy number 3, which is principal success matters. We all know that it is important that the leaders of the building, that they are also working in tangent with everyone else. And I'm talking about from the district all the way down. So what we do as principal leaders, and there's 4 of us executive directors in teaching and learning. It's myself, Dr. Maria Lucero, Joel Brumley, Jamie Lee. What we do is work with principals on what they call individualized learning plans. And so what that means in essence is that we have regular one-on-one meetings that are scheduled throughout the year. And in those meetings, what we do is really discuss the data that we were just discussing now, and then planning with the grade level team, with the principal, to bring down to the grade level teams. And we're always looking at the data. We often do learning walks during this time. We want to see what is the building goal, if you will. And so we want to know, what is the plan? And once we know the plan, then what's the evidence that we should see when we're conducting those learning walks? And so when we have that, then we come back and we dialogue with the principal. In those individual learning plans, what we call ILPs, they're focused on the improvement of efforts and data. And so that's where we come in. As Dr. Maria was just saying, she has 6 buildings. We all have 6 buildings. One of us has 5, but the work is still the same. What we want to do is improve the educational improvement in every classroom. And then all that leads to the evaluation, in which we are led with following the AWSP model, the framework for leadership, and evaluate our principals. Other things that we do is we have monthly principal PLT meetings. So professional learning, that word came up earlier, just a little bit ago, with professional learning. We have monthly meetings with all of our principals. And so in that is that we're focusing on where are we at, not only at the building, but district-wide. It's kind of calibrating the whole system, if you will, right? And in that, we also, apart from that, we also have monthly principal cohort meetings. And in those cohort meetings, we meet with the principals we directly work with. And again, we meet prior to that to calibrate. We want to make sure that the message is the same across all groups. We've never done that before in that capacity, in that way. So that's new to us. And I think that's going to build on where we want to go as a district. Let me talk about the principal retention, our rates or updates. This is from 2019 to current, 2025. On the blue across the top, school level retention rate, turnover rate. We have it down on the left-hand side from elementary, and then it goes middle school, high school, all schools. The number is important here. So if I stick with elementary, the retention rate the last 5 years has been at almost 29%. If you look at that, the number has changed. It's 14. It's changed. There's 11 movements that we've made, if you will. So 78.6% turnover rate. Then the next slide, I'll get more into detail with this. But middle school's at 50%, high school 20%. And when you're talking all schools, it's roughly just below 50%. Right? So when we look at this this information, I'm gonna read this for those who can't see it online and who are watching, but the recall rate, our principal turnover rate. We've had people in our own system, and we always look to build our own. So we have Executive Director Joel Brumley, who was promoted to this position, as well as Jamie Lee, also promoted from Executive Director to Executive Director of Learning and Leadership. Aaron Thomas, who was over at Nob Hill, was promoted to Director of Student Services. Gabe Stotts, who's here in attendance, promoted to Director of Career and Technical Ed, or CTE, from Davis. Kevin Brennan, promoted to Director of Special Education. Samantha Howell, who presented earlier, promoted from AP at Wilson to leading this building. Stephanie Casillas, promoted from AP to McClure, Principal at McClure. Craig Smith, Chris Whitehurst, Andrew Espindola, they were all APs in their buildings, promoted to the principalship in their respective buildings. Nicole Bass, promoted to Program Manager of CTE, Career Technical Education. Jill Ceja, moved from Ike to Davis. Talia Garcia, from Garfield over to Wilson Middle School. And lastly, Lois Menard, who was K-8 Yakima Online, who merged with Stanton Academy. So you can see that's just from this last year. So when I look at this data, it kind of makes more sense that there's been a lot of movement the last 5 years, right? Our principal demographic data. And so when we look at the demographic, the key that I have up on top, the 5 colors, those are all representing at less than 1% in our district. So I'm looking at the bottom colors, the green and the blue, in that key. And so that blue represents white. And we're talking about principals and APs here. So that first bar graph that you see is our main principals, our 23 principals. So out of the 23, 80, I thought I was hoping that would be a lot larger so I can see that. Yeah. Yeah, 83% are white, 10.4 Hispanic, Latino, and less than 1% are other. When you look at assistant principals, 60% are white, 14.5 are Hispanic, Latino, and then less than 1%. And when you look at all principals combined, 71% are white, 28.5 Hispanic, Latino. I remember presenting this last year, and this statement still holds true that doesn't represent our students in Yakima, where 82% are Hispanic, Latino, and only 14% are white. So it's important to mention that via a UW, basically an article that was published through UW, there's data to support that students of color who see themselves in their school, and I'm talking about leadership here, have a 13% better chance of graduating high school. And then they have a 19% better chance of just starting college, right? And that's a representation. That's for people of color. And that's important to state here because it doesn't match our principals to our students, but we're working on that. We have some people in the hopper right now who we're trying to build our own, like I said before, with our principals. And so we have that building up, but we do know that this does exist, our demographic. When we talk about gender, our principals, so if we're talking about just the principals, you're looking at the male and female, male being blue. 47% are male, 53% are female, so we're almost even on our principals. When you look at assistant principals, it's a 60-40, 60 male. And when you combine all principals, it's almost half. 46 male and there's more female when you combine all principals than there are male. And then if you look at our students, it's 49-51, 51 male. And so that's pretty even, if you will, when you talk about male genders across our leadership. There's other data you have in your doc. What I wanted to end with, this picture was just taken last month. And so this is our principal group, our cohort group, and there's a book that was provided to our superintendent from another principal. And this is called Micah the Mighty Marathoner. It's a book about inclusivity. And to me, to us and executive directors, it's a great way to end this. This is book written by, written about a second grade student who likes to do typical second grade stuff. The thing is that this student, he has special needs. He requires special needs. And so there's a story written by his sibling, and it's called A Marathoner because she's writing through her perspective on her brother and her dad who runs in a marathon. And he's participating. They're both participating in this. And so she writes this book called The Mighty Marathoner, and it's all about inclusivity. The point about this is our leadership, right? And in this case, it started with our superintendent who brought it down to our principals, and they each received a copy of this book. I know our focus is bringing inclusivity into this. So I thought this was a good way to end our principal leadership. What questions do you have?
Any questions for Hector or comment?
I have a few. Looking at the retention update slide, the turnover rates certainly appear to be alarming. I understand your explanation, but I wonder if we could get a kind of a traditional turnover rate where we're not necessarily counting internal mobility, but looking at people who've actually departed and what the actual turnover rate is, using kind of a standard formula for turnover. So really just counting the people who have exited the organization. And that would be a more accurate reflection of what the turnover is for principals. And that would include assistant and regular principals, I guess.
That's right.
In the same category. So I think what you said is the turnover rates that you have listed here include internal mobility. So when someone's promoted, are we counting that as turnover?
We're calling it as recall. Turnover, so recall, just bringing them back. Some of them were APs, if you will, and they moved up to a principal, right? And so to answer your question, let me go back to, I think, your first question. The next slide, which I didn't put on here, I believe there were six admin that did leave our district, right? And so that's...
Yeah, and so the turnover rate, so looking at all schools, turnover rate's 87%. And so are you saying that 87% of all principals, those principals left the organization, they left Yakima School District?
You're talking about this year, I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, all schools. In the last 5 years, yes.
87%.
87%.
Have
There's been
left.
movement. There've been movement, sorry. There've been movement. And so when you're talking about turnover, you're talking about leaving the district. is
Leaving
what
the
you're saying.
district.
Yeah, and so this includes turnovers. For example, myself, 3 years ago, I was including this data from 3 years ago. I didn't leave the district, but I am considered in part of this
Okay.
recall.
I'd like to request the data in a different format then, using people who've left the district. Because I think that would be just a better reflection of what
Sure.
actual turnover is. And then do we have a sense of what turnover looks like across the, public education industry?
Yeah.
Is that?
I can find that. I can look for that. I don't have
Okay.
that on hand.
And I guess if the turnover is a kind of I guess what would be considered standard turnover outside of public education, where we're only looking at people in these roles who have left the organization, not been promoted or things like that. I think that makes sense, but just left the
Sure.
organization would be
Okay.
a helpful way to view that information. Traditional turnover, yeah.
Okay. Somebody just to clarify, what if somebody went back to left the principalship?
If they haven't left the organization, I think that's fine, yeah.
Just left, yeah, in general. Okay.
Anthony has a comment.
What I could tell you is, as a representative of classified employees at the Highline School District, where I was prior to coming here, not just classified, but teachers as well, because one of the programs that we, when I say we, Trevor and I helped work on, were the pathways for teaching positions, because we had 20% turnover a year. Since I've been at this district, I've monitored it, and I was impressed that we had about 10% turnover the entire year, each year for the first 4 years. Last year, we had less turnover, and I think part of that is also because there were less advancement opportunities in the surrounding districts around us. So in all reality, and I don't have the exact number for this last year, but it was somewhere around 70% turnover as opposed to 10%. I'm sorry, 7% turnover as opposed to 10% turnover. So in all actuality, I look at this data differently from the perspective of one of the larger employers in the Valley and one of the better paying employers in the Valley. More people come here and stay in comparison to the district where I came from, where we would hire new teachers or have somebody we would recruit from out of state. They would get here and then they would immediately start looking for greener pastures. We are the greener pasture here. But if you look at 10% over a 5-year period, then yes, you're going to see 50% turnover. And again, that's better than what I had personally represented. Our local represented 10 different school districts, and those numbers are consistent. The Highline numbers were consistent for the west side because, again, with many districts of a larger size, people were always looking for a bigger and better place to turn to. We're here, our numbers, believe it or not, are good.
And the 10% most years and 7% in the last year, that's the traditional turnover is what you're quoting. Is that right?
Correct. Last
Okay.
year's turnover was less than the previous 4 years, and I do
Yeah.
believe that was based on the economy and the opportunities of the surrounding district.
Yeah.
I'd say 10% is the industry standard, Graciela. That's what I've seen across the state for the most part. It depends on district to district, but industry standards around 10% as well.
Stacy?
Thanks, Trevor. In addressing this, if we go back to the beginning, this presentation is strictly on the principalship in the Yakima School District. The change is not addressing the district level leadership, just principal leadership. And so when Hector talks about turnover rate, he's talking about turnover rate from the principalship itself. And so he's not talking about who left the organization. He's simply talking about the movement within the principalship and the leadership for our buildings that we have. So just for clarity. So if you'd like some stuff around how many directors left the organization, how many principals actually left the organization itself, go elsewhere, we can provide that information to you.
Yeah, I think when we're looking at this data, and certainly for the benefit of the public, if we're talking about turnover rate, there's a generally accepted formula that's
Right.
used for that. And so, for any lay person, myself included, when I see 87% turnover, this doesn't define the formula that's being used. It certainly does say it's over 5 years. So it looks like since we're adding everything together instead of looking at turnover year to year. But I think we probably need to, just to avoid any misperceptions out in the community, define what we mean by turnover here. And then for future presentations, I guess I'd like to request a traditional turnover number that only is looking at people who have exited the organization, and looking at and comparing that to what the industry standard is. I think that would help us understand if there's any areas of concern. If our true turnover rate, our traditional turnover rate was 87%, that would indicate there's a major issue.
Right.
If we're in average 10%, then that would indicate there's not a major issue. And in fact, if we're lower than that, then that's, a trend in the positive way. But I do think this is very confusing, how we're defining things here. And then I'd also, I guess, just recommend we don't add things together for a period of 5 years, but we look at it year to year. And that'll just help us understand what things are happening year to year rather than just looking at a block of time. That doesn't really tell us a whole lot.
So we will make that change for the next presentation for sure. Yeah, we can get that.
So just for clarification, we're saying that every 5 years, 80% of the principals change, move around,
Not
or
every
there's a
5
different
years.
person? Okay.
Last 5 years.
It's just the last 5 years. It's just over the last 5 years. This is the movement that's happened. That's
Okay,
occurred.
over the last 5
Yeah,
years.
it's not an average of
Okay.
every 5 years is what happens.
Yeah,
It's
when-
just what's happened the last.
When
5
I
years.
see 87%, it seems like if you get we know that the important role that the educational leader plays in academic achievement. And if that person is changing a lot, then a new person's going to come and bring their own values, their own beliefs, their own systems, their own way of supervision, their own. And that changes the whole school dynamic, right? And then if you change a year later or 2 years, then here comes another person and bringing the whole new. So maybe that's another thing to look at in terms of our academic achievement, right? I don't know. It's just something that comes to mind.
So I appreciate you saying that. I know in this past year, we've had a couple principals who were assistant principals who took the lead, so that doesn't happen. So we maintain what's been going on, such as over at Nob Hill, for example. McClure is another example. There's others, but I understand what you're saying.
Any other questions or comments for Hector? I would just, in listening to the conversation and looking at the data, I think an interesting I think what we value is stability in a position and in a building. And it would be a nice statistic to see how long the leadership in that building has been there. Yeah, okay. Yeah, average tenure in a building. Yeah, I think, you know, if we're seeing that kind of turnover every year or two, it takes a year or two just to learn your building, I would think.
Sure.
And so are we seeing a majority of our people are staying, you know, 4, 5, 6 years? Or that would be a useful statistic as well, at least to me.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you. Okay. Ooh, there it is. Next up, we have updates. First, from members of the board. Do we have any board updates?
I have a couple. When I was at WASDA's annual conference last weekend, I told Trevor that these were at home, and I remembered I had them in my backpack. I attended the large school caucus, and part of that, they had materials on the table with the new school board standards. Trevor, do you have one, or did you give yours to Ryan? These are brand new. The WASDA board approved these just this last year and a couple meetings ago. And so I think it's important to just individually take a look at those. And if you have questions, we can try to get them answered. Also at annual conference, the keynote speaker for Friday morning was Jeff Utek. And I don't know if any of the board members have heard him speak before, but he spoke about the differences, the generational differences that we see in society today and what we see in our schools today, and what the individual expectations are of the different generations. I was hoping to have found his presentation. I haven't found it yet, but maybe it's still up on the WASDA website. I can look. But it was really interesting when you think about the fact that many of our, I think there are 6 generations now, many of our teachers are either baby boomers or millennials and Xers. Some of them are Xers. But then they are teaching the generations after that, and it's likely that there will be kind of differences in their expectations from the older generations to the incoming younger generations. And it occurred to me that we probably see that in our classrooms, and it was pretty interesting. There was also, we had the awards Friday morning, and as we learned ahead of time, because there had to be arrangements made that actually didn't work, but I was in the back of the stage trying to fight my way through a non-functioning elevator lift, And we ended up just saying, to heck with this noise, and going around and receiving the award in the front of the stage. We received the Board of the Year for large school districts. That's school districts over 9,000 students. And Grandview received the award for middle-sized districts. So I think that 5,000 to 9,000, I think. So I was surprised that there were 2 award winners from the Yakima Valley. That felt kind of good, because we don't see those sorts of things very often. And then on another note, as I told you last time, I think, policy 1400 has been updated. I'm hoping that we can see it as a first reading next time, maybe. And then would have it for second reading the next meeting after that. There aren't too many changes to it, but it would be nice to get them implemented.
Thank you, Martha.
Okay.
Anybody else with a report from the board? Okay. Dr. Green, superintendent's update.
I'm going to do this a little bit differently tonight. Can you hear me all right? Want to give my update or my report from here because obviously I want to present you with something. But before I do, I think it's important to talk about your role as board members. And I've been reflecting a lot on your positions. And I think about our students, and the reality for our students is every day, our students come to be part of our district and work with our staff, our teachers, our paraeducators, our classified. And what we try to eliminate is the reality that any student at any time could go through an entire day without hearing something positive. That's not acceptable. That wouldn't be acceptable. But we also know that that's something we always strive towards. It's highly improbable that a teacher every single day with the number of students that he or she has will be able to say something positive to every single student. Collectively, yes, but every single student becomes difficult. But having that bus driver where students enter and they're hearing that positive encouragement helps. Having that crossing guard or having that one-on-one or the person at recess, all of that is so important. And I think that, you know, being in the setting that we're at today and having Samantha Howe, she's still here. Her eyes just got really big as I said her name. Having her give her presentation and just feeling the positivity exuding from her and just knowing that that is part of now the culture of Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary, and that is something that all of her staff and students get to partake in every single day is something that makes my heart warm. And I say that because for the past 10 months specifically, you as board members have heard something negative at the beginning of every single meeting that you come to. And it gets very tiring and it's cumbersome, and it's so nice to have the state recognize you as a board of the year, and to have that happen in Yakima and validating the effort and the work that you put forth, where you have had all types of false accusations as far as making 6 figures when you make nothing to do what you do. But what I will tell you and tell anybody else, and that's why I wanted to be up here today, is that you as individuals and collectively are brilliant. You are amazing at the things that the effort that you put forth into this position. You're very empathetic, you're caring, you're concerned about our community, the questions that you ask, the time that you invest is never recognized enough internally. And I apologize for that if I could. I don't think I'm in a position to apologize on behalf of our community, but I think we live in a society where it's much easier to condemn kind of where we are than somewhere else. I have the luxury of being part of several organizations here in town, and I go to a session which is the Downtown Association of Yakima. And it's once a month, there's a gathering in the morning. And one of the things that has really stuck with me from going to the most recent meetings were to hear different business owners talk about how people from the outside of Yakima view Yakima and the positivity that once they come to Yakima and they see the businesses and they see the community and they get out of certain areas of town that, you know, as you drive in from Seattle, it's a little shaky when you walk in, you drive in, but they get to know our community and they love our bed and breakfast. They love our businesses, our restaurants. And that's just something that was commented collectively around the room. And what was lamented by our business owners was the fact that from our internal community, we tend to talk bad about our own businesses and not elevate them the way that they should be elevated. And so to some degree, we're our own worst enemies internally. So it's so satisfying that you are recognized as Board of the Year. And I don't want you to look at that and think, you know, yeah, but we could do better here and we could do better there. Absolutely. And I think it goes back to the statement that we had this conversation before about, are we okay with the achievement that we're at? No, it's okay not to be okay with that. And it's okay not to be perfect in your position, but keep striving to ask those questions and be better at what you're doing. And I want to recognize the effort and the compassion and the empathy and the love that you put into this position on behalf of our community and our students. So I have for you today, we have the award for large school district Board of the Year. I thought it should be about 10 times this size. Really disappointed, underwhelmed at this size, but this is okay. And then I have some certificates for you. So I'm going to ask Kirsten to come over here. We'll have you stay where you're at, and I would ask Director Beckett and Director Navarro to stand in between our board members that are seated, and let's have her take a photo. I'm going to give you a couple of each a certificate from the state. So could I get some applause for them, please? Yeah, thank you.
Don't put it behind the water bottle. And then,
Thank you. I'm hopeful that you're able to indulge us at some later point. Maybe we can get you in front of the sign in front of our building at another time, but we wanted to take that picture today, that photo. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that at the WASDA conference, we were able to present on to a full session. I got to tell you that it's very gratifying to be able to be in a room that seats, what was that, Martha? 100? At least. And typically when we've gone, we have some attendees, but we're lucky to get maybe 30. And there were 9 to 12 sessions during that time. And the room was about 90% capacity. The presentation topic was actually on staff reductions and the staff reduction process, lessons learned and reaffirmed. And I can tell you that we had districts and boards from all over the state in that room to hear what is happening or what has happened in the Yakima School District, the way that we've addressed the issue of RIF and recall, and recalibrating our system because it's not an anomaly what we're facing in Yakima. I think talking about what I did before about your characteristics as board members, I really appreciate you standing firm to your core values and making hard decisions and supporting hard decisions in difficult times. If it was easy, anybody would do it. But true leadership takes some courage, and the decisions you've made and supported are going to right the ship here faster than it will in some of our other districts. And in fact, I'm very concerned. Luckily, I don't work in those districts, but I think the biggest example would be the biggest district in our state that has gone from closing 20 schools to now not closing any. And I can tell you that's because it's a very difficult thing to do with the community, and the easier thing to do is to not do that. I can tell you also that the bigger concern in that messaging, and I want to get legislative for just a moment, the bigger concern on my part is knowing that one of the main approaches that we will see coming from the superintendent of public instruction beyond the big three, which is, MSOC, maintenance, operations, supplies, special education, full funding, and transportation. Beyond that, he's advocating for lifting the levy lid, which does nothing for districts in our area. And yet it will satisfy, I believe, the legislators' belief that they have done enough for districts. So what I'm concerned about is that the messaging of not closing any schools in the Seattle School District and relying on the legislative approach of lifting the levy lid completely, thereby enabling them to have a higher income, something that we would not be able to benefit from, nor would districts in our area, is going to be detrimental to what we're facing. So just sharing with you that the presentation went really well. We had wonderful feedback, but we're seeing more and more districts fall into situations that have not been anticipated prior. And I think also I think I've sent you some more information over the last couple of days. So if you check your messages, there'll be some information. Another one of those, I think there's a $10 million reduction now happening in Bellevue this year, during this year. So, which was just announced. So that continues, but districts are really interested in what we're doing, and they're interested because of the way that we've done it and the people that we've been able to bring back in positions. So with that, I'll conclude my update for today, and just want to thank you once again for your service as board members.
Thank you, Dr. Green. And next up, we have two reports that were scheduled earlier, but we're going to add them into tonight's marathon meeting. So hopefully we'll encourage Mr. Cooper to be brief.
Start, Director Walker.
Thorough but brief. So first we'll have our fiscal year-end report for 23-24 and our monthly financial update.
Good evening, everybody. Jacob Cooper, Assistant Superintendent of Finance. Pleasure to be with the Board of the Year again. Before I begin, and I will be brief on the legislative session before us, I do want to set some expectations. Apologies for being ill last meeting. Barb Fiskus, who supports the superintendent, said she got some phone calls from some staff thought that this was the meeting we were going to roll out reductions in amounts. Just want to let everybody know that is not the context for this evening. So usually the normal cadence as the fiscal year ends, it takes a couple months for the books to close. The business office usually brings 2 reports in that November-December timeframe. We're going to do that. There's going to be some optimism, some pessimism, but overall we're heading in the right direction. And then on the levy lid and levy equalization, Superintendent, I want you to know when I was on the west side, I often ran legislative bills to increase the levy lid. That is a sign that the legislature is out of money. And what I also want to let you know is when I was on the other side of the hill, I made sure that I reached over here, and every time we increased the levy lid, we increased LEA percentage as well. So now that I'm over here, I'll make darn sure on the policy side that we'll be getting the LEA increase if they're going to increase the levy lid, because again, Seattle already has a $1,000 a head levy increase above everybody else. So their financial position is interesting. So year-end report first. So this is the fiscal year end ending August 31st, 2023-24. The good news first, fund balance. So I'll use a racehorse term, as we ended the home stretch, we flogged the horse down the home stretch. So we did everything possible to increase our cash position at the end of the year. So every trick I knew, every indirect, everything possible to build that fund balance, because liquidity has been our major issue. So that fund balance was estimated in at 8. We got in at 13.6, and that was not by accident. That was purposeful as possible. So we built the fund balance up. So about 5.6 million to the better. So that's good. We'll get to the bad a little bit later. And we'll mixed. So fiscal year end numbers are there. I won't belabor it by fund, but again, you can see that the fund balance began at 23. I originally estimated a fund balance draw of 14.4. We only drew at just a little over 10.3 million. So again, better financial position than we started or anticipated. Again, conservatism is purposeful when you're looking at year-end fund balances, and 1% of your operating budget is $3 million approximately. There's a revenue comparison from fiscal year to fiscal year 23-24. The one that I would like to point out on this, obviously, is the major decrease in federal. If you have it before, you can see we went from close to 40 million in spend on federal ESSER down to just under 6. So a huge amount of federal money leaving the system from one year to the next. Budget to actuals, I will not belabor the point. You can look at the 3-year trends again. Our budget has decreased nominally, so in real dollar terms, the last 3 years, so we are effectively reducing the budget. Our ALE and enrollment trends, the 5-year. I'm about close to readers. Don't put me in readers yet. I'm a good 6 months away. I'm a good 6 months away from 5 readers. It's so hard. Font or standard for projection? Again, the enrollment, as we've seen, has continued to decline gently over time. And you can see the top one is the general ed FTE, and then the smaller volatile bars are our ALE enrollment. And ALE we'll discuss as we get to next year, most important. Here we go. Cash is king. So we'll talk about cash as we look at September and October. Again, you can see projected cash was right around 14. We ended the year at around 10-ish, and that's not fund balance. Remember, fund balance versus cash are different. So cash is real time. Fund balance gets affected by accruals and timing of accounting and invoices and revenue. So it can be different, and obviously it's $3 million higher than our current cash position at year end. Okay. So I like to be as transparent as possible with fund balance because there's never the right amount. This is the Goldilocks of numbers for all chief financial officers. You either have too much or not enough. The fund balance in Yakima is unique, and I want to show you why. So, board of directors, first off, we are just below your threshold of 5% in total fund balance. See that 4.46% as our ending. However, our detail is important because one thing that you see in Yakima is, and I want to point out, there's $3.2 million of our fund balance that's technically skill center. So if we have 10 million, not in this, 3 million is reserved for skill center. So year over year, they carry over money. We are the fiduciary. So technically we have access to that cash. But when you see it on the fund balance, just know when you look at your total fund balance. So if somebody says we have 10 million in fund balance, just know approximately 30% of that is skill center. It is in our coffers, but it is reserved for them. And again, we have hardly any other reservations except for those that are legally required. So traditionally, we may have more fund balance reserved for curriculum adoptions or things in the future. We have winnowed those down to the bare minimums and statutory compliance. And you can see in total, again, 4.4%, and then just under 2% for unreserved fund balance. So better than anticipated. So we anticipated 8 conservatively, went at 13.6. So, and still very prudent to be adopting the budgets we had and have done going forward. So any questions on the fund balance percentages? I just like to lay those out in detail so there's no hiding the ball and everybody knows exactly what's in the bank at fiscal year end. So SWOT, I like to do a SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Just a quick one. I think our collaboration and transparency is getting better and better. We bring these tough issues out to the fore. We discuss them in front of the public as we should, and then obviously we get input from the community as we move forward. That is the most difficult part, obviously, when reducing or building budgets, is that collaboration and transparency, particularly when you have a volunteer board that meets every 2 weeks and we give you information like in a huge chunk and you have to make the sausage in front of everybody. It becomes extraordinarily difficult. And then realignment, again, as we discussed many times, Yakima hasn't faced major budget reductions since the late 90s. And of course, I've had the opportunity to be able to be your financial leader during the first time we ever had to do those reductions. So in that case, our realignment will continue. Again, it is important for the continued health of the organization that we do that work. And we are getting closer and closer to financial stability. So weaknesses though, we still have declining enrollment. Inflationary pressures have mitigated some. We'll see what those, but we are still living with the last, 3 or 4 successive years of inflationary increases of double digits on our things we purchase every day. So we'll be living with inflation. Continued gap in state and federal revenue, particularly special education. Obviously, that's one of the big threes. And our fund balance and liquidity. Our opportunities are continued alignment. Future capital levy or bond, we do have a need in the district, obviously, for capital improvements. We're in process on a committee on that, but we do, in the long term, need some capital funding. We're going to continue to seek out efficiencies and cost reductions. You saw those go through last cycle. We're going to continue to work on, obviously, balancing reductions with program, as you heard earlier from our YEA president. When you have less staff, it does create impacts all through the system, and we're obviously in some cases, we're still understanding those impacts and have been working to monitor and change those as they occur. Enrollment fluctuations. We'll talk about ALE enrollment. We had some changes in our alternative learning enrollment. We'll see that in the next little bit. And then recession and inflation. The economy, I believe it's going to be in the upswing, except we are in this state facing a really large budget deficit. So the governor released a letter to his agency heads, as he does. It's a 10 to 12 billion with a B dollar budget deficit. Now that's the 4-year deficit. Remember, the last few terms we haven't had deficits. We've had surplus, we had federal money, and then on the tail end of ESSER. This next round, though, with caseloads up and revenue down, the state is facing a 10 to 12 billion dollar budget deficit hole over the 4-year period. That's their 4-year outlook. So we will be in a very much different position next session than we were this session. We will be protecting revenue. LEA is one that's always on the block when it gets really bad. That's why when they're talking about increasing levy lids, that means they're looking at trying to save some money somewhere else on the levy system, at least what I've found in my career. So it's going to be a tough legislative session. I believe we're going to be playing defense more than offense just to keep what we have. So that is also important for me to make sure you know that the timing of the budget changes or reductions will be a bit later than last cycle. This is the first year of the long session, this is a long session. Sine die won't be till April. And we have a new governor and everybody will be in all new seats. So I imagine it could take a long time, especially with the deficit. As we know, they've gone right up to the wall right before June 30 with the settlement. So please be patient. Right now, enrollment projections are finished. I'm very close to articulating kind of a preliminary deficit because we will have a deficit next year. This is what I'm seeing going forward. But as soon as those numbers come to light and we get them honed for you, we'll start talking about that publicly, which will be after the new year, not too far after the new year. Are there any questions about that? Okay, one down. I'll go right into the next one because I'll just, if that's okay with the board. Okay. On the 2-for-1, you get September and October now. So we just did fiscal year end, August 31st, and now we're going to do September, October. So this is a combined monthly 2 months. My clicker's dead. Okay, so let's talk about items of interest. So beginning fund balance, we talked about 5.6 million greater. Student enrollment was less than projected at secondary 9-12 and ALE particularly. We had positives though. We have increased CTE enrollment. Bonnie's not here, but she has been kicking some butt on CTE enrollment. And our SPED numbers are also up, but up with more compliant IEPs. So our IEP compliance is up, but it means revenue is up. So mixed bag on the student enrollment. Still had, we bled more students out from a head count to FTE basis than I thought, 9-12. But overall, we were in a positive position, 3 million greater than anticipated. So better than anticipated, but again, I just talked about those headwinds that are coming at us shortly. Enrollment. You can see, I want to talk about enrollment because I was trying to understand enrollment in Yakima is exposed in a few different ways. Now, what the state does, which gets confusing, is in our basic ed enrollment, they still include our skill center kids that are served, that are our students, but are served by the skill center. So we have about 180 of those kids that are in grades 11, 12. So sometimes when you see these numbers, it looks like enrollment's not declining, but it is. So I just want to point that out. It depends on how we compare it, and I'll show you the. So here's the projection and how it shaked out. I wanted to be more transparent on my hits and misses. So you can see elementary enrollment. So it is important to note that our kindergarten class came in right around 1,000 kids. So we talked about that kind of being where our new normal is. So around 1,000 kids in a cohort. K's right there. That was right at projection. So elementary, right on the money, as you can see, budget to actual. Same with middle. And then high school, it's the head count to FT and the alternative learning that's happening there. So I missed by a couple hundred. However, as we talked about, fund balance ended higher. So we're still net 3 million to the better. 120 or so off in ALE. That number is changing and increasing over time. And I just talked to Brenda, and she's getting some homeschool kids. Is she still here? Oh, yes. So, and homeschool and cooperative is growing as well. So that's not reflected in this, but we are generating revenue, a new revenue stream, which has been very helpful. So cash flow, I want you to remind you that, so fund balance ended at 13 million or so. Remember, we got a $4.5 million liquidity loan in August or September, sorry. So that right there, that graph reflects two things I want you to know. That reflects decreased enrollment. So I've already captured the decreased revenue in the cash flow projection. Secondarily, it also incorporates the money we borrowed at $4.5 million for liquidity. And so that's built in there too. So if that graph, if you want to look at it, if you want to imagine it about $4 million less, $4.5 million less, that would be our cash position without our liquidity. So I want you to know that's all priced into the cash flow analysis. Revenue, budget versus actual. Again, we run on budgeted revenue until January, and then we'll flip to actual, which is already incorporated in the cash flow statement, but not in these revenue numbers yet because these are as they're recorded. But as you can see, our revenue is clicking along just fine as projected. Budget to actual on expenditures. You see expenditures are decreasing month over month. My team and I are watching payroll very closely. We still are trying to put more budgetary controls on both substitutes. So our sub costs continue to rise. We hear in our staffing concerns, part of that is staff absences on Fridays and Mondays. Our sub costs, if you looked, I think we did this presentation about 400,000 a year. Next year's spend for substitutes will be about 8 mil. So 20-fold when it comes to substitutes. So when there are staff absences here, it affects everybody. It affects the sub costs and also affects support in the buildings day after day. And so that's something that I know HR and statewide we're working on, but staff absences are killing districts around the state. And we were hoping post-COVID that attendance would bounce back, but we still see some rather poor attendance data on some of the, particularly Monday and Fridays on the shoulder days. Supplies and materials, again, we have cut MSOCs, as they're known, down about as far as this CFO is comfortable with cutting. If you look at the percentage of your budget, there might be a little bit left in there, but not much. If you get too high out of whack on your 85-15 percentage, you don't have enough money to pay the light bill and insurance then. So we'll be monitoring that. I monitor that percentage religiously. And so that's something I continually look at, but we have to have enough money in our MSOCs, particularly since we have no capital funding to be able to cover roof failure, HVAC, things that aren't covered by insurance, but could also prevent us from having school. So, all right, lots to cover. I'm going to go debrief it in 10 seconds. Sorry, Norm. Fund balance ended higher. We were conservative, 13.6. Enrollment a little less than projected. All in all, we're 3 million better than I anticipated when I sat before we came before you in August. So we're on the right track. We're getting stable. We are going to have a very difficult budget cycle just because of all the information that's going to come from the legislature and all the unknowns. And my goal, as well as Trevor, is to be as transparent and as prompt as possible. The reduction amount will not be of the magnitude of prior year, which allows us to be more precise in our timing and reduction amount in particular. But so that's, I kind of want to lay that groundwork for you, but we will be back after the new year with fresh data, and we'll begin another budget cycle. I know you're looking forward to it greatly. So any questions? Be happy to entertain.
Any questions or comments for Jake?
Can you just elaborate a little bit more on the homeschool partnership and how that works with the budget?
Come on. I'll let Brenda, Melanie come up here.
No
real quickly.
pressure.
I know. So really quickly, can you tell them about the homeschool cooperative?
Absolutely. So we started a homeschool co-op where parents who homeschool their children can go through the Yakima School District. We get a full FTE for the students. We parents get to pick the curriculum that they want for their students off of we have a menu of options for each grade level, K through 8th grade. So far we've had 7 parents come in and they pick the curriculum they want. We order it. Jake approves it. Thank you. And we actually just got our first set of curriculum in where parents are picking it up. They're very happy. They're excited. And then we partner them up with one of our ALE teachers. And so once or twice a week, we work with the students to make sure that their pacing is good if they need help. The homeschool students are also able to use our tutoring that we have built into K-8. And also we are actually hiring a counselor 2 days a week as well. So the homeschool kids actually get to use the counseling services that we have as well. So it's a plus for the entire community.
And every homeschool student generates 1 FTE?
Dependent. So some homeschool kids are able to take a class at their brick and mortar, their neighborhood school. So then that neighborhood school would get a 0.2 FTE. We would keep a 0.8 FTE. Also, some parents might say, hey, we just want English and math. And so that would be about a half FTE. And so it's really, we build the program around what the parents want for their kids.
It's really interesting and innovative, I think. I know that Richland has a similar program, but I don't know that too many districts do around here.
Yeah. Richland has a program with 700 homeschool kids in there, which is about $7 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Well, we'll have more than that. So we're Tyler, the principal in Richland, has been helping K-8 online. So our program will be just as great as Kennewick, if not better.
Yeah, their program has been in place for years.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And how many students and family do we have involved in that right now?
Well, we have 7. We just started last week. And I will say the past 2 years, we've had 2 kids in the program. So we've more than doubled. Tripled. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brenda.
Sorry, I have a follow-up question for you. So we have 7 students and we're hiring a counselor to support 7 students?
No, the counselor is for K-8. We have 175 students, and I'm using my Title I money to fund a counselor 1 to 2 days a week for all of
Oh, I
K-8.
see. Okay.
All the homeschool kids get the same opportunities that my K-8 students get.
Okay, I
So-
see. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have two quick questions, sorry. So you mentioned the end of year fund balance being 4.46%, and you mentioned the skill center budget. Are you suggesting we separate those 2 budgets, or are you just asking us to consider that as part of the reason why that's below the 5%?
I just like to point that out because it is a nuance in our fund balance that very few districts have, where you have another organization's money that we're the fiduciary of. So when we see 10 million, just know that 30% of that is not technically ours. So we would have to carry likely a higher fund balance in addition to that. I mean, to be more prudent financially, I believe. So it is in there for liquidity, but I wanted to put it out because it is something that's unique. So we may, as we get down the road and have conversations about what fund balance should or shouldn't like going forward, that is something we could incorporate potentially and say we would exclude skill center from that percentage because it technically is not ours.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea to separate those or to figure out what is a true fund balance, right? That reflects the school
And it is a
district
true
budget.
fund
So,
balance, but it is technically, we are the fiduciary, but if they, for some reason, were like, I want all 3 million, that's not how it's written, the agreement, then we would have to figure out how to move that out of the money. So something to think about for sure.
yeah. And the next question was, you mentioned the subs, teacher subs, and Mondays and Fridays are the bookends you call. Is there a difference between, I mean, are those more significant? Do they cost more if they're out on Friday and Mondays, or?
Just
are-
numerically more because a lot of.
Oh,
staff
okay.
Along, move a 2-day to a 3-day, or there's holidays, right?
Well, I'm not sure. That's why I was asking, what's the significance
probably
of
give more
that? So, okay.
I think he was just calling out that we see more absences on Mondays and Fridays.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't clear on
Yeah,
that. That's
yeah,
what
That's all you were.
I was asking what
identifying.
the significance of that statement was. The bookends.
Usage on those days.
Okay, is there a higher request for that? Okay, thank you.
Question on the enrollment trend. I didn't quite understand what you said about the skill center FTE being added. And so is that a change this year or has it
No, it
always
has,
been that
it
way?
has historically been in the number.
Okay.
But when I use the brick and mortar number without it, so I've had to be cognizant in my reports to make sure, because OSPI, if you looked on OSPI's website and you look at if you looked at our P23, the actual count, unless you knew to take those skill center kids out of grades 11 and 12, you would assume our enrollment is not gone down. You know what I mean? You have to account for them. Because if you just looked at and why I wanted to point out to you all is because if you go to the state website and you look at the P23 and you look at district enrollment in grades 11 and 12, and I talked to them, I said, why do you include, technically they're not our students because they're full-time skill center, but why are they included in our resident BEA? And they're still looking at the issue. So.
Sorry, so I think I don't understand. And so are you saying that historically, the number that we've been reported, that has been reported on this slide?
The one that I reported historically to you on one of the comparisons had, so if you look at one of the slides says with skill center and one says without skill center and ALE. So I make a differentiation on the slides. I just wanted to point it out to you.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I guess I'm still confused. And so the slide that we've seen monthly
Yes.
forever now, which I don't know what slide this is, but is that what number this is? Does that include, do all of the years reported include the skill center students? Or is there a change in that slide in the
It does,
methodology?
it does, it includes them in there.
Okay.
In your basic ed grades 11 and 12. But if what I'm saying though is that is not our true brick and mortar FTE.
So
But it's the way it's reported at the state level. If that
Okay.
makes sense to you.
Okay. Is the black line then, does that reflect, does that essentially mean that there's more students in skill center that are not Yakima School District students? And that's why it looks like there's an increase in enrollment?
Yes.
Okay. I think it would be helpful to include the explanation on here because that's, no,
I was
don't think
trying to
anyone's ever
articulate
gonna
it.
remember
That's
that.
why I did it the first, perfection is a goal. So in this case, I wanted to explain to you what the difference was, which I effectively did, but confusingly so. So next time I'll explain it a little better and maybe call it out on the slide, like you suggested.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
But I think what you're calling out is it's reported at the state level as it being included in that accounting thereof. So any school district that has under its purview,
So
a
like
skill
Bethel.
center
Bethel would be an
would
example.
be showing the same thing that we show, which is that money included in that allocation, right?
Yep. Well, I was trying to explain it.
So we could.
And
we
even more
could-
confusingly.
So we could pull it out, but
Yes.
just recognize that the state level requires it the way that it's being shared with you.
That's fine. I think it just needs to be more clear on this,
Okay.
on the slide,
Agreed.
because it looks like enrollment's going back up.
And what I didn't want it to have happen is somebody go back to the state numbers and be like, why is Cooper 180 off? Well, I was trying to explain to you why. it's the Skill Center kids, even though they're technically full-time Skill Center, they're included in our 1191 basic ed on the enrollment sheet. So it's very confusing. It took me, I had to call OSPI. I'm like, what are you doing with my enrollment counts? So I finally talked to TJ Kelly, who guided me through. So I'll make sure I peel it off and call it out a little more clearly. But I did want to point it out to you for the sake of transparency, so there was no confusion. But I created more, which is often what the CFO does. My apologies.
Any other questions or comments for Jake? Thank you for a thorough presentation. Next up, we have some calendar updates. Kirsten, did you want to lead that off?
Good evening. So we have reached the week where this Wednesday, December 4th at 6 p.m., we will have the Davis High School Auditorium Remodel Celebration. That will last until about 7:30, and there will be hot chocolate served afterward. It will include some student performances and some leadership and student meetings or speaking. And Graciela will close us as the board member closing for the community. And then for school board meetings coming up on December 17th at 7 p.m. at Central Services, you have a meeting. January 6th at 4 p.m., we'll have another school visit at McClure Elementary. And then you have a board retreat on January 13th starting at 8:30, and that is at Central Services. And lastly, in January at 7 p.m., another board meeting on the 21st, also at Central Services. And then if you look at all of the varsity home sporting events, there is a plethora of events there, and I will let folks go online to see those. Any questions?
Any questions for Kirsten? And just one addition, will come at the meeting on the 17th is also the meeting where the board reorganizes officers. So keep in mind who you would like to be an officer or nominate someone. So we would do that at the December 17th meeting. Now we have arrived at the opportunity for comments from the public on agenda items. Do we have any commenters in the public? None at all. Moving on. We have two policy governance issues. One is approval of policy 1000.2.3 financial condition and a policy 1000.2.6. In both policies in the Survey Monkey, everyone indicated in full compliance, and I made a mistake on one. I said in partial compliance, and it should have been full compliance. I misread a question. So rather than go back and completely redo the survey, I'll just clarify that the board indicated that both of those policies were operating under full compliance. So are there any questions about that? Okay, do I hear a motion?
I move that the board approve the monitoring reports for 1000.2, I'm on the wrong one.
2.3.
2.3 and 1000.2.6 as submitted.
Do I hear a second? It's been moved and seconded to approve policies 1000.2.3 and 1000.2.6. Any other question or discussion? Liz, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett? Aye. Director Navarro Jr.? Aye. Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva? Aye. President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
And we now have arrived at the second opportunity for comment from the public on non-agenda items. No takers this evening. Okay. We do have a need for a 15-minute executive session to address a matter of potential or current litigation. So do I hear a motion to adjourn for executive session?
I move that we adjourn to executive adjourn's not the right word. I move that we move to executive session for 15 minutes for the purpose of litigation with the attorney present. And where are we going to be?
She will be joining us.
Okay.
Yeah, she has a room. Yeah.
In the identified room
Okay, it's been moved. Do I hear a second? Been moved and
Second.
seconded to adjourn. Can we just have a voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay.